Thank you for joining us for this week's message at Crosswind Church. If you have any questions about this message or about Crosswind Church, please visit us at www.crosswindchurch.net, or you can email us at info@crosswindchurch.net.
Wow, well, good morning, and happy Father's Day out there. My name is Joey Milmore. We're so glad to have you here today. I'm an elder here at Crosswind Church, and as you'll notice, I am not Jeremy Powell. I look much better than Jeremy Powell. Actually, nobody would probably say that, but hey, even my wife probably would say that. I don't know. Who knows? But Jeremy's not with us today. He's on sabbatical, and so I'm so happy to be here with you today. So glad y'all come and chose to worship with us today at Crosswind. And if you've come for this your first Sunday, we just started a new series. Actually, you missed 1 week of it, and I believe everything's online for it. But we've started a new series called Starting Point, and Jeremy spoke last week about how would we start our faith over? So that was the big question, is how in the world as an adult or somebody either start faith new or return to their faith, how would they do that as an adult? And we've talked about all kinds of things, and one of the things that he left us with last time is we talked about some of the faith paradigms that you had been given as a child. We talked about some of these, and we talked about, you were probably told as a child that God is good. God is good. God cares for us all. He's a loving God, and by all means, He is a loving God. We're told that as children. But we also see lots of things in the world that maybe don't seem to be good, at least from our perspective. We think maybe they're not so good. You might have been told that God rewards good and punishes evil. And as we talked last week, it seems to be a lot of people that seem to be not being punished too much, and they're pretty evil, okay? And we see lots of people that are really good people that seem to can't catch a break, or things seem to always be going wrong with them. And so when our minds start thinking about that, we try to connect that with what we learned as a child, and we see what's going on in our adult world, and we think, maybe that's not making sense. We also may be told, God answers prayer. God answers prayer. And again, I do believe that God answers prayer, but a lot of y'all may experience something maybe in your own life or somebody you know, and you say, I don't think God answered my prayer. Don't think He answered the prayer of my parents or my grandparents, or didn't answer the prayer of my coworker. And these are good people, and God didn't answer their prayer. And then also, you might have been told Bible stories. You learned about Noah, you learned about Adam and Eve, you learned about the walls falling down at Jericho, you learned about Samson, and you learned about all these great things. And you say, man, God moves in powerful ways. But I've never seen Him move in my life. I've never seen Him move in my community. I've never seen a giant fall in my community. We've got lots of issues going on in our communities, right, around the world. We've got drug issues, there's all kinds of things, there's crime, there's murder, there's all these awful things, and we say we don't see the giants move there. God has to take care of that, and if God was good, we put the pieces together, then why would we let those things happen? Well, again, those are all great questions. They're all great questions. We're not going to talk about any of them today. I'm going to apologize if you came here expecting to get all the answers to that. I don't know. Those are very difficult questions. We should wrestle with those questions, and we should grow in our faith and think about how that works. Okay? But as a child, you may have thought that. If you learned as a child, and then you hit the pause button on your faith and you did not grow, your faith didn't grow as you grew, and your understanding of God didn't grow as you grew. And all of a sudden, you fast forward, and it's 20 years later, you're an adult, and you say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't seem to fit. That doesn't seem to fit. So what would we do? How do we come back to that? Because, a fundamental question that we think about, and last week Jeremy talked about this, when Paul spoke to the Athenian scholars that were there, these are supposed to be the smartest people of their day, and he started with something unique with them. He didn't start with, the Bible says, we learned that last week. Remember, the New Testament didn't exist in a cohesive format until 300-400 years after Jesus died. So they didn't have a Bible. There was no Gideons out there. They weren't putting the Bible in all the little hotels, which thank God for what they do. I think that's an awesome ministry. But there was no Bible to do that with. And he also ran into other things. A lot of people couldn't read. There's other issues, not just having the text there, but there was all kinds of things going on in society. So Paul starts from the beginning. And so he speaks to something to the Athenian scholars that they can understand. You know, he talks about in the beginning, you know, God created. I mean, everything you see is there. Now today what we're going to talk about in part 2 is we're going to talk about coming back to God. Or how does the start of a relationship begin with God? Now, the interesting thing about that, when you start talking about a relationship with God, a lot of people will do one of two things. Okay, first of all, you're going to have people that maybe grew up in church or kind of understand something like that. They're going, oh yeah, a loving God, I can have a relationship with God. Then you're going to have people out there that's going to say what? A relationship with God? You know, one, did you hear the things I just said? I didn't think he answered my prayer. I didn't see him move. There's all this bad stuff going on there. And you're talking about a relationship with this God that you say that I don't even know exists. Okay? And that's okay. It's okay to have those feelings and think about those things. But when we talk about a relationship, one of the first things we got to do to have a relationship is communicate. And talk to one another. And grow with one another. Think about people you have a relationship with. Think about people that you have a true relationship with. You know, I've met lots of people in my life. I mean, I've been very fortunate, got to meet, lots of famous people, and, I've got to meet a couple of presidents and things like that. I don't have a relationship with them. I met them. I don't have a relationship with them at all. But I do have a relationship with people that I regularly communicate with, and people I talk with, and people I've grown and I've learned to trust, and things like that. So like those closest to me. So one of the things we want to talk about is bringing back this relationship. Now, feeding on what Jeremy started last week, we talked about things, we're going to kind of start in the same place. So if we want to start talking about having a relationship, one of the first things we want to think about is what breaks relationships. So just like when Paul spoke to the scholars, we'll start in the beginning too. And so we'll say, just like he said, in the beginning, God created everything. Now remember, just as a background here, when God created everything was perfect. We're told that he created Adam and Eve, and he placed them in a perfect garden, and he had a perfect relationship with them. He walked with them in the garden. Now, by the way, when we talk about a relationship with God today, and we think about maybe something that's not a physical manifestation of God, keep in mind when Adam and Eve walked, there was a physical manifestation of God. God walked in the garden with them, so it was a very close relationship. And as we see, when he did this, if we go back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 27-28, it says, God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. He blessed them, said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the ground. Man, everything was great. Everything was great. And as my wife always reminds me, and other people I know, he said it was very good after he made Eve, right? Guys, I don't know what that tells us for Father's Day, but it was very good after he made Eve. Just good after he made us. I don't know. So it's Father's Day. Be nice to your fathers now, and things like that. But it was very good, he tells us, after he does that. We don't go very far in. The next chapter, we see this startling great turn in this great relationship. This relationship that was built on trust and communication and talking and spending time with each other. It was great. But then we see, just if we flip a few pages and go to Genesis, if we go to the 3rd chapter of Genesis, it says that, God banished them from the garden. You know the story. He told them, he gave them one rule. One rule. And they broke it. And so the perfect relationship was forever severed. Forever. Now some people look at that and go, man, that seems kind of harsh. One rule. One rule. And sever a relationship. Now think about how that goes in your own life. We all have relationships probably that are broken in our relationship with other people that are severed over one rule. And by the way, I would even venture to say, probably severed over one stupid issue. Something meaningless. Something that really doesn't matter, but yet it severs the relationship with other people. Okay? So, Adam and Eve made a mistake, what we would say. That's what we would say. We look at it and say, man, that ain't a mistake. It's just a mistake. One mistake. God told me to do something. Didn't do it. So he banished them. And I would tell you, throughout the rest of history, including today and every day else, man has struggled to try to find a way to get back in to that perfect relationship. We have. We've tried it, whether it's religion, whether it's self-help, whether it's money, whether it's drugs, whether it's power, whether whatever it is, you fill in the blank, to try to get back to that place that we think is perfect and what's right. And that's kind of what we look at. Now, we're going to use a word here, and we're going to talk about something with Adam and Eve, and it's something that's not a very popular word. And we talk about severing relationships. It's called sin. Sin. Three-letter word. You don't hear a lot of that, you know. We hear all kinds of comments about mistakes, problems. You never really have anybody tell you sinned. I mean, if you've had somebody, you know, that you said, well, you know, you sinned against your boss, sinned against your wife, your husband, you sinned against your children sinned against you. We typically would never say that, right? When we reserve that word sin, typically we're always referring to that in a theological standpoint or something that has to do with God, okay? But we know it's there. What Adam and Eve did was sin, but it had repercussions to all of us. Okay, it comes out. So let's think for a minute. Let's start a little bit about what our culture talks about with sin. We've replaced that word. We don't like that word as individuals because it has this really heavy connotation to it. You know, it's one thing to do wrong, it's another to do sin. We understand that elevates to another level, all right? I mean, we think about that just in the way we think of it. So we try to get away from that. So let's look at some of the things. So what are some of the things our culture, you know, since we don't use the word sin, we use words like indiscretion. What an indiscretion? You know, it wasn't really sin, it was indiscretion. I made an error. An error. And by the way, I'm an economist, I've taken lots of math tests and things. I've made lots of errors in my life and still do them all the time. Thank God for calculators. That's a good thing. So, you know, errors. Errors are things like, it's you know, I hit the wrong button on my calculator and instead of getting 5, I got 6. That's an error. You made an error. By the way, still wrong in my class and Dr. Peter's class. So still, it doesn't matter, right? Even if it's error. Still count on it. Errors. A mistake. I made a mistake. I made a mistake. That's a real common one. An oversight. A slip, maybe a misjudgment, a poor judgment. How many times have you watched the nightly news and you saw somebody stand up in front of the microphone and say, I made a mistake. I accidentally embezzled $10 million. It was a mistake. Oh, I made a mistake. I had an affair for 25 years, you know, and I made a mistake. Or, you know, all kinds of things like that. My favorite one is misinterpretation. That's my favorite one. Because here's what happens. Not only do we hate the word sin and we don't like to admit to wrong, we don't like those things, we like to come up with words like misinterpretation. Because misinterpretation, what does that say? It doesn't really say that I made a mistake. What it really says is, if you just understood why I did what I did, so really the fault's yours. You're just not understanding where I'm coming from. You just don't understand that. So not only is it not your mistake, it's your fault for not understanding why I did what I did. Okay, so that's a great one. So misinterpretation, you know, we see that one a lot. So society tells us all the time of what we've got there. So let's think about that. Let's go back and look at what Jesus and those closest around him said about sin. Because as you'll recall last week, remember the big question, you should all remember this, and you have to remember next week too. The big question is what? Who is Jesus? Who is Jesus? And we're going to talk about that throughout this whole series, right? So one of the things we talked about is the big question we've got to ask ourselves is who is Jesus? That's what Paul pointed to. Paul didn't argue about semantics. He didn't argue about every jot and tittle that's in the text. He didn't argue about I'm smarter than you. You're stupid. I can't believe you didn't agree with this. You're going to go to hell or whatever. He didn't do any of those things. He didn't do any of those things. He said, let's talk about Jesus. So let's look at what Jesus had to say. So we're going to look at a few scriptures here. So we're going to look at two different people that were very close to Jesus and see how they describe sin. So we're going to start with the first one. We're going to start with a man named John. And if you did not know, they should know. John was a real live breathing person. He existed. We know he existed in history. Okay? Separate from the Bible, we even know that. So we know those things that he was there. And so we're going to start with John. Now, John was as close to Jesus as anybody humanly probably could be on the earth. So very close. Not only that, John describes himself as the apostle that loved Jesus, that Jesus loved. But here's the way I really know they were close. If we look and think about John and his closeness to Jesus, when Jesus was dying on the cross and had his mother there, and he had to put her in someone's care, you know who he chose? John. John's who he chose. So when we look at things like that and we say, yeah, John was close to Jesus, yeah, he was close to Jesus. Because who would you leave your mother with? It's somebody close and somebody you trust. And so he did. And so John says, Jesus told John, here's your mother. Mother, here's your son. So it was John's responsibility to take care of her. So Jesus and him were really, really close. So if we look at what John had to say, so there's a book called 1 John, which was part of the letter. There was 3 of those he wrote. Actually, he wrote the book of John, which is one of the Gospels. But then he also wrote 3 other letters. And these were letters. They're creatively named 1 John, 2 John, 3 John. So, the creativity just keeps flowing there. I thought it was pretty cool how the biblical folks put it in the Bible. So in 1 John 3, 4, and 5, we see where John says, everyone who sins breaks the law. In fact, sin is lawlessness. But you know that he appeared so that he might take away our sins, and in him is no sin. So notice something real quick. So we learned that sinning is lawlessness. So we somehow we figured there's some kind of law out there. There's something that I'm not supposed to do. Okay, there's something out there, so somehow this is written down. It's either written down or it's written in our heart or wherever it is. But somehow there's something that says, I'm not supposed to do this, and yet I do it. When I break those, that becomes sin. It's lawlessness. He said it's lawlessness is what it is. And remember what I told you, that relationship in the garden, it started there. One simple rule. One simple thing. And that led to lots of other things. Right? So one of the things that we know is from what John says, this gives this connotation that we desperately need somebody to take that sin away. And the cool thing is, Jesus comes to take it away. So John not only points to that, hey, there's this lawlessness, there's these things we do that are wrong, but he says, guess what? I've got a remedy. By the way, that's like telling, that's the great news about what John has to say. It's like if you come to me and I say you're sick, but all I can tell you is you're sick. I don't have a cure for you. I don't know what today did. Kind of like this, when my kids were, when kids were little and they cut their hand, they'd show, what should I do? I'm like, I don't know. Go to the baby line. I don't know. I don't have a solution for you. So this is wonderful. So John actually gives us something. He says, hey, there's this lawlessness, you break the law, and there's Jesus, and Jesus comes to take it away. So it's great. Let's look at another person real quick. And this is going to be James. James is Jesus' brother. Okay? James was not a believer while Jesus was doing his earthly ministry. Okay? So we've talked about this before here. But talking about being close to Jesus, he grew up in the same house with him. He was younger than Jesus. He grew up in the house in Solomon. Imagine the difficulty you would have when your brother is the Son of God. It's probably pretty bad. I'm sure Jesus always did everything right in the house, and James did everything wrong probably in the house. It's just the way it is, right? So James, the brother of Jesus, who had a lot to say about how we treat one another and had a lot to say about relationships. He talked about how most of our relationship issues with God are directly related to our relationship issues with other people. Okay, so James was great at this. So he wrote about this and talked about that. So if we look, and he summed it up simply by saying, if you look at James 4:17, James says, if anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it's sin for them. So now James says something different. So not something different, but it gives us more clarity to what the picture's going on. John says that there's lawlessness there. We break the law. James says, hey, you choose to sin. He says, if you know the good you're supposed to do and you choose not to do it, that's a sin. So that's a basic context to what sin is according to the way James talked about that. So at the heart of the matter is we know it breaks relationships. Now, we talk about the friends of Jesus. Let's talk about Jesus real quick. I'll tell you a couple of stories here. We won't have to necessarily look here. But Jesus is calling his disciples. There was one day when Jesus was out, and Jesus walks by a tax collector's booth, and he sees a young man named Matthew. Okay? And he tells Matthew, he says, hey, come follow me. And Matthew gets up and follows him. By the way, the greatest decision Matthew ever made. Ever. You know, and for eons and eons into eternity, he's thankful that he made that decision. And said, yes. He said, come follow me. So, he calls Matthew. Matthew, by the way, is a tax collector. We've talked about this before here. But tax collectors were like really bad. Okay, we think about bad people. We all, because you know how we are. We're all sinners and we all do crazy bad things. And so the best thing that we can do is we love to talk about how someone else is more bad than me. Well, at least I'm not like that person. At least I'm not like this person. So Matthew was a tax collector. So in that day, everybody looked at them and said, oh man, that's the scum of the earth. They're awful people. So one of the first things that Jesus does after he calls them, they go to his house and eat. So who do you think Matthew calls to come and have dinner with him all? His tax collector friends, who are all bad people as well. So he calls them and they have dinner. And the Pharisees are watching the story, and they're saying, I can't believe that your master eats with tax collectors and sinners. And let me read this just to make sure I get it right, so I have it memorized. One of the things that Jesus says, he says, on hearing this, Jesus said, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. So when Jesus is confronted with this notion of sin, or he comes in this notion of who's redeemable and who do I care about this, he says, I come for the sinners. Do you see what he says there? Do you see the compassion and concern in those words? The concern? He says, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Mercy, not sacrifice. In other words, you can kill all the animals you want. And you can put all the blood everywhere you want on there. You can try to be good, and you can do this, and you can follow this. He says, that's not what I want. I desire mercy. And we all are in desperate need of mercy. Later on, the Pharisees, who were always just a bunch of, oh my gosh, I don't know how to describe them. All they wanted to do was try to get Jesus in trouble and try to discredit him. And they hate him, and they talk about how awful he was. But it's funny, when you read the text, they're always there following him around. It's kind of strange. I keep wondering what that must have been like. I mean, did they show up when he's out there on the hillside? And did Jesus look at him and say, hey, you coming back for more? You want a piece of me? He didn't ever say that, I don't think. But they were always following around, pointing the finger, trying to figure out a way. And so one of the things they did, they got real smart. They said, you know what? The law says that you shouldn't commit adultery. We go back to this thing we just said earlier. The law. And we talked about that. The lawlessness, all law. There's some kind of connection there with the law. So they got really smart and said, you know what? We're going to catch a woman in the act of adultery. Not made up adultery. They actually caught her in the act. By the way, no mention of the guy in there, but just her. So of course, these Pharisees are awful. So they bring this woman, they throw her at Jesus' feet and says, hey, the law says she should be stoned. And they're trying to keep track of him, right? And the Pharisees say, what should we do? And Jesus says, he starts writing in the dirt. We don't know what he wrote in the dirt. We have no idea, but all of them leave. And when he raises up, there's none of them. And when he asks again, he says, where are those that condemn you? He says, no one. And Jesus says, neither do I condemn you. Now go and sin no more. Do you see the heartfelt passage there too? I don't condemn you. Jesus doesn't come to condemn you. This is the great problem we have with relationships. We're somehow convinced because in our mind we know that sin is wrong, whether we admit it or not. Whether the hardcore atheist or agnostic says there is no God, I don't believe in sin, deep down in every human being, we know there's something wrong. Just like I tell people all the time, you don't have to teach people to be bad. Hey, go work the 2-year-old room in Sunday school. And give one of them a toy and don't give the other one and see what they do with it. They'll take the toy and they'll bash the other one. Right now, these kids do not get their heads bashed. That's a bad thing. But you see what I mean? There's something inside us that do that, right? And we know something's wrong. And we're afraid to admit that something's wrong because if we admit that something's wrong, then, oh my gosh, boom, the hammer falls. That's not what Jesus ever said. If you grew up in a church or somebody told you, oh my gosh, you're a lousy sinner and you deserve to go to hell and blah, 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 and if you do this, you're going to hell. Hey, that's not what Jesus said. Jesus didn't say that. Because here's the thing. Jesus knew we're all sinners. We're all in the same boat, and guess what? The boat has a giant hole in it. And it's all sinking. The very best person you ever knew in your whole life is in the sinking boat as well. The very worst evil person you think of in your life, they're in the same sinking boat. We're all in it together. It's called the human race. It's called the human condition. Right? So Jesus said, I don't condemn you. Go and sin no more. By the way, just as a preface, Jesus did not say go and do whatever you want to do. Jesus did say go and sin no more. Okay, so it's not like He doesn't give you a license to sin. So, let's look at one real famous passage. So let's close and talk about relationship. We're going to talk about probably the most famous parable that Jesus ever did. And it's fitting that it's Father's Day because it really has to do with a father and two sons and a broken relationship. You probably all heard about it. It's in Luke 15. It's called the prodigal son. Now, just a little bit of background for this, and we'll read through the text. Previously, before Jesus tells the parable of the prodigal son, we got to understand a few things. He's told a lot of parables before this. He said the Pharisees there, the teachers of the law, all these people there, and he's told all these stories. So the previous chapter, he talks about things like, hey, I've called a great banquet. I want to call people into my kingdom. Nobody wanted to come. They give me excuses, so I said, go find other people. He also talked about things like, hey, there's a cost to discipleship. Jesus says, go, take up your cross and follow me. You know, that's what he said. And then he talked about things like lost corn, lost sheep. He talked about those things. We don't really understand that stuff unless you're a sheep farmer, I guess. Or you got gold coins, or I guess Bitcoins nowadays. So then he comes to the story of the prodigal. So let's look at this story. And this story is written and told. He's telling it to believers and non-believers. It's a mixed audience. This is not something he was telling to the inner circle. This is not something he was just telling to believers and said, hey, this is the good stuff. I'm going to give you the good stuff. No, this is something he was telling to everybody. He meant this for everybody. So the Pharisees were there listening to this as well as his disciples. So let's pick up in Luke 15:11. I think it'll be on the screen. It says, Jesus continued. There was a man who had two sons. The younger one said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything he had, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen in that country, who sent him into the fields to feed pigs. He longed to be fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of the hired servants. So he got up and he went to his father. Let's stop right there for a minute. Let's start talking about this. We'll go a little bit. So you got to understand, the people that Jesus was talking to understood exactly what he's talking about. Okay? They understood who all the players were. The Pharisees that are sitting there, they know that the loving Father represents God. They know that the wayward son represents sinners. Now they're going to also know about the other son. The other son represents them. Okay? The other son, the older son, who's taken home, represents them. But what they did see from this is a broken relationship. So if we look at 12, it started out with the offense. The younger son said, give me my share. Remember, this is not like today. This is not going to write you a check and give you part of my money. Everything I have is like the land and animals and stuff. So you need to sell it and give it to him. So it disrupted the father's life. The son went off. It said he went off to a land and took all his possessions. Oh, his son didn't leave anything behind to come back to. So he willfully wanted to run away from the father. He wanted to be out from underneath his thumb, as he thought, or under his rule, right? So he took everything and he ran away. And remember, the father in the story is God. It's a picture of running away from God. Okay? In verse 14, it says he spent all his wealth, and he spent everything. It was a severe famine. He had to go out and sell pigs. He had to feed pigs. So we see that the dynamic had changed. He took all the stuff and left. Now all of a sudden, bad stuff happens. He spent good money. There's consequences with his actions. Okay? He didn't make a mistake. He's not misinterpreted. He didn't do poor judgment. He willfully ran from the Father. And so when the Pharisees heard this, they would have been rolling and writhing in their seat, going, "Oh my gosh, he's feeding pigs. This is a Jewish boy. Oh, he's irredeemable. No hope. No hope." Because they're going, "Give it to him. Give it to him." Because that's what they were good at. They were good church people. They were good at pointing their finger. "Oh yeah, give it to him. Give it to him." Not what the Father said. Not what the Father said. That's what they were saying. And so he's speaking this to them. So one of the things that we see, I love this, and John MacArthur puts it best. I'll read this quote from him real quick. He said it best. He says, "The prodigal son is a living symbol of every sinner who ever lived, including you and me. And we best pay close attention to the warning that Jesus gives." Real important. I want you to think about that for a minute. Why would we leave a loving Father? Yeah, you listen to the story, you go, "Man, that doesn't make any sense. This kid had it made. Why did he leave? I don't know. Why do we do that? Why do we walk away? Why do we feel that we're so oppressed, or I don't want to live under these rules?" Because we all think about the rules. We don't think about the relationship. We forget about those things. We worry about a list of, I can't do this, I can't do that. Think about the relationship, not that I can't. And that's what this young man was troubled with, and that's what a lot of times we get troubled with. And so the real problem with what the son did was not his wild living. We like to get all that. "Oh yeah, he went. See, like I said, you shouldn't live in places where, well, maybe that might be, it might be a good thing to tell you." But it wasn't that. It was an affront to the Father. He didn't sin against himself. He sinned against his Father. It's not the wild living. It's not those things. It was the affront was to the Dad. It was to the Father. And one of the things we got to think about is we all start our lives with our back turned to God. We did it. That's why when we talk about things, people say, you choose to follow the devil, or you choose to follow God. Remember, when you're born, you start on the devil's team. You don't start on God's team. We don't start good and somehow we do bad and somehow it puts us in the devil's team. You're already on the devil's team when you're born. Does that make sense? Our backs are turned that way. Paul tells us that a mind governed by the flesh is hostile to God. There is no medium ground with God. The people that say, "Well, God's okay. I'm okay with God." There is no medium ground with that. If you are not following Him or do not have a relationship, it says you're hostile to Him. Not just, you're indifferent. It's not like God's up there going, "Well, they've never done any harm. Yeah, that's okay." That's not how that works. It's not how it works. It's one or the other. There's two types of people. There's those that have a relationship with God, and there's that don't, and then there's the ones that are on their way to having a relationship with God. There's really three, not two. Okay? So, I love this. So verse 17 says, "He came to his senses." It says, "How many of my father's hired hands have food?" Here's the key. He comes to his senses. He hits rock bottom. But the neat part of this is the fact that he thinks about his Father. This is the first time in this story that Jesus is telling that the prodigal thinks about his dad. And he starts going, "Wait a minute. My dad's a loving God. He cares for me." So he thinks about his Father. How many of my Father's people? I'll go back in verse 18. I'll go back to my Father and I'll say, "I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants." That's what the son decides. So he decided in his mind. This is where he made the decision to ask for forgiveness. It wasn't necessarily when he went and showed up. That's when in his mind he went, "I've sinned." I looked in the mirror and went, "Oh man, this is me. It's all me. It's all me." And so the first time in his life, he determined to walk away from sin and go to the Father. But let me tell you about the best part of it. My favorite part of the prodigal son, and I've studied it quite a bit over the years, because I've been a prodigal son. We've all been. Some of us just do a better job of hiding that. We really do. But in the end, we're all prodigals. We're all that picture. It's all of us. My favorite part is verse 20. So he got up and went to his father. It says, "But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him." Now at this point the Pharisees would have flipped out. Okay. First of all, fathers as a patriarchal society, they didn't run. They didn't run. They would have done that. So the very notion that God runs to them, they would just freak out of that. But look at what we see here. God responds. He's looking for his son. And the son tells him, hey, I've done all this bad stuff. But the father doesn't even listen to him. He says, but, bring sandals for his feet, bring a robe, bring a ring, and let's have a party. That's what God said. God didn't say, I condemn you. The father didn't say, you lousy, worthless son of mine. He did not say, it's all your mother's fault. That's probably what most of us would say today. And the mother would say, it's all your father's fault. But he didn't. He didn't say any of that stuff. He said, bring a ring, bring a robe, bring sandals, let's have a party. All those things that he asked to do were things for a son or a family member, not for a servant. And remember, the son said, maybe I'll be a servant. God didn't want you to be a servant. He wants you to be a son. He wants you to have a relationship with him, is what he's saying. And so we see this here in this passage. And the father says in verse 24, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and found. Wow. He was dead, he was lost, and now he's found. In other words, what happened to the relationship? The relationship was severed. Now the relationship is back together. Really cool. Now let's close with this. We all, like the prodigal son, can be far from God. And by the way, if you think you don't need to be forgiven, or that you have no sin, then let me tell you something. You are far from God. Very far from God. Okay? If you feel like you've done anything wrong that deserves forgiveness, then you're very far from God. Okay? We're going to pull up a passage here. I'm going to close with this. Paul told us in Romans 3:21, and we're going to use the Message translation because I love the way the Message translates this. Well, let's read it real quick for you. It's on the screen. But in our time, something new has been added. What Moses and the prophets witnessed to all those years has happened. That God setting things right that we read about has become Jesus setting things right for us. And not only for us, but for everyone who believes in him. For there is no difference between us and them in this. Since we compiled, and this is my favorite part, this long and sorry record as sinners, both us and them, and prove that we are utterly incapable of living the glorious lives God wills for us. God did this for us out of sheer generosity. He put us in the right standing with himself, a pure gift. He got us out of the mess that we're in and restored us where he always wanted us to be, and he did it by means of Christ. So folks, today, that's the question for us today, is do we need a restored relationship with God? Do we need to start a relationship with God? And when we end here, we pray, and if you'd like to talk to somebody about that, you go to the starting point, and we can talk about it. There'll be people back there, there'll be other elders who can talk to you about a relationship. Because remember, we're all in community. We've got also one more quick warning for all the folks that do have a relationship with God. The story didn't end with just the happy story of the son coming back. God later talked to the older brother who refused to come out. And it says that the father pleaded with him, come out, your brother's back. He was dead, now he's back. The son refused to come out. Now folks, as believers, when we see people that we think are very far from God, don't ever have the tendency to think somebody's irredeemable. That somehow they get what they deserve. Or, hey, if they would just do this, they would just do that. Don't be like others, Don't say, hey, it's their own fault. They're beyond God's grace. Remember, God's grace is big enough to fix anything. There's nobody that you will be able to God. And that's what the story is. So I'm going to pray for us. If you'd like to talk to somebody, come over to the starting point room in the back. Hope to see y'all next week. Let's pray. Dear Lord Jesus, thank you so much for all that you do for us. Father, thank you for caring for us, even when we don't care for ourselves. Even when we look at life and we think, oh my gosh, I'm a good person. I don't need you. You're looking for us. You're looking for us, and you want us to come. Lord, not with condemnation, but with relationship. Lord, I pray you speak to our hearts, Lord. Give us understanding, Lord. Help us walk with you. Help us to come to you. Lord, please go with us here this week. Forgive us where we fail you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Hey, y'all, have a good week.